Fugitive protects boy from biker gang, but he was a millionaire's son and did something that shocked everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. Sweat dripped down the 35-year-old woman's face as she ran desperately through the narrow streets of the Bronx. Her bare feet pounded against the hot afternoon asphalt. Her heart hammered in her chest like a frantic drum, and each breath burned her lungs, already tired from 2 years of constant flight. Distant police sirens echoed, but she knew they couldn't be looking for her this time. Not here, not now. It was then that she heard a child's desperate cries. She stopped abruptly, hiding behind a dumpster, and watched the scene unfolding before her. A 4-year-old boy was running in panic, tripping over his own small feet, while 3 masked bikers chased him, roaring their noisy machines. The metallic sound of the engines mixed with the child's terrified screams, creating a nightmare symphony that made her stomach churn. The boy fell in the middle of the street, scraping his knees on the rough asphalt. Tears streamed down his dirty face as he looked in panic at the approaching men. One of the bikers got off his motorcycle, revealing tattoos that covered his muscular arms and a cruel smile that promised only suffering. She closed her eyes for a second, weighing her options. Fleeing would mean safety, remaining invisible as she had learned to be in the last 2 years. But that boy, his scared blue eyes reminded her of everything she had lost, of all the injustice she carried on her shoulders. Without thinking twice, she ran out of her hiding place. "Hey!" she shouted, drawing the criminal's attention. "Leave him alone!" The bikers turned around, surprised by the interruption. What was supposed to be a simple and quick snatch and grab had been complicated by the appearance of this disheveled woman in shabby clothes. She took advantage of the momentary distraction, grabbed the boy by the arms, and pulled him with her, running towards the maze of alleys she knew like the back of her hand. "Get them both!" one of the men yelled, starting his motorcycle again. She ran like she had never run before, carrying the child who was crying softly against her chest. Her muscles ached, her lungs begged for air, but she couldn't stop. She knew every corner, every shortcut, every hiding place in that area where she had taken refuge in recent months. It was her advantage against those men and their noisy machines. After 15 minutes of running through narrow alleys and jumping over low walls, she finally spotted her destination, an abandoned warehouse where she had hidden before. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. She pushed the child inside and closed the door behind them, leaning against the old wood as she tried to catch her breath. The boy was huddled in a corner, trembling like a leaf. His blue eyes stared at her with a mixture of fear and gratitude that broke her heart. There was something familiar about that angelic face, although she couldn't identify exactly what. "It's okay now," she murmured softly, approaching slowly. "They won't find you here." The boy didn't answer, just watched her carefully. She noticed he was clutching something in his hand, a crumpled piece of paper he had picked up from the ground during the chase. For the next 3 hours, they remained hidden in the silent warehouse. She shared with him the only granola bar she had in her bag, watching him eat slowly as dried tears left streaks on his dirty face. The boy didn't speak, just constantly drew on the paper he had found, creating scribbles she couldn't decipher. The drawings seemed important to him, crooked lines that could be people, circular shapes that might be faces, strokes that repeated obsessively as if they were memories that needed to be recorded. There was something urgent in the way he held the broken pencil he had found on the floor, as if those scribbles held vital secrets. When night fell, she managed to tune into an old radio that only worked with great effort. The local news talked about the disappearance of a child in Midtown, the son of a prominent businessman. The description matched perfectly with the boy who was now sleeping in her arms, exhausted by the day's trauma. For the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to think beyond her own survival. That child had a family who was desperately looking for him, people who loved him and wanted him back. Unlike her, who had no one in the world besides her own shadows and fears. 3 days passed in that warehouse. She cared for the boy with the tenderness she had kept hidden for so long, sharing with him the little food she managed to buy at a nearby bodega. The boy gradually relaxed in her presence, although he remained mute, communicating only through his strange drawings and expressive looks. On the 3rd day, while watching a desperate plea on a broken television in a diner, her heart almost stopped. The man who appeared on the screen begging for his son's return was devastatingly handsome, with eyes the same intense blue color as the boy, and an expression of despair that touched something deep in her soul. He was the millionaire businessman who owned the largest construction company in the area, a man she never imagined crossing paths with. She knew that returning the child meant exposing herself, running the risk of being recognized and captured by the authorities. But looking at the boy drawing silently beside her, she understood that some things were more important than her own freedom. The call was made from a rusty payphone on the busiest corner of the neighborhood. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number she had memorized from the television ad. Each ring of the phone made her heart beat faster, and when a male voice finally answered on the other end, she almost hung up out of pure self-preservation. "Hello?" The voice was deep, laden with an exhaustion she knew well. It was the voice of someone who hadn't slept in days. "I have your son," she said quickly before her courage abandoned her. "He's safe with me." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. When he spoke again, there was a desperate urgency in his words. "Please, tell me it's true. Tell me he's okay." "He's okay, but traumatized. I need to return him, but I have conditions." "Anything, whatever you want. Come alone, no security, no police, no one. If I feel like it's a trap, you'll never see your son again." She set the meeting for the next day in an abandoned square on the border between her neighborhood and Midtown, a neutral place where she could observe all movements and have multiple escape routes if necessary. She hung up the phone, her hands still trembling, knowing she had just made the riskiest decision of her life. The next morning, she arrived at the square 2 hours before the agreed time. The boy walked beside her, holding her hand confidently, carrying his folded drawings in his shirt pocket. During the night, he had finally spoken his first words since the incident. "Daddy will find me?" She hid behind a leafy tree from where she could observe the entire area. At 10 o'clock sharp, she saw a sleek black car approach. A man got out alone exactly as she had demanded. Even from a distance, she immediately recognized the face she had seen on television, but in person, he was even more striking. The 30-year-old millionaire businessman was tall and elegant, wearing a suit that cost more than she earned in a year when she still worked. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it countless times during the sleepless night. But it was his eyes that drew the most attention, those same intense blue eyes as his son, now filled with an anguish that stirred something deep within her chest. He looked around nervously, his hands trembling slightly as he searched for any sign of them. There was something vulnerable about that powerful man that contradicted everything she had imagined about people of his social class. There was no arrogance or impatience in his gestures, only the pure despair of a father who didn't know if he would see his son again. "Daddy!" the boy suddenly shouted, letting go of her hand and running towards his father. She stepped out from behind the tree, watching the reunion unfold before her. The businessman fell to his knees on the square floor, not caring about the dirt that would stain his expensive suit, and enveloped his son in an embrace so intense that they both began to cry. It was a scene of pure love that filled her eyes with tears that she quickly tried to wipe away. When they finally separated, the man looked directly at her for the first time. Their eyes met across the distance of a few feet, and she felt something strange happen in her stomach. It wasn't just gratitude she saw in that deep blue gaze. It was something more complex, more dangerous. "Thank you," he said, approaching slowly, as if he feared she would disappear at any moment. "I can't express how much—" "You don't need to thank me," she interrupted, taking a step back. "Anyone would do the same. That's not true, and we both know it." He was too close now, and she could smell the expensive cologne he wore, mixed with the scent of nervous sweat. There was something masculine and disturbing about that proximity that made her heart beat irregularly. It had been so long since she had felt any kind of attraction to a man that the sensation scared her. "How can I reward you?" he asked, taking a wallet out of the inside pocket of his jacket. "I don't want your money." "Then tell me what you want." She looked at the boy, who was now clinging to his father's legs, as if he feared being separated from him again. The drawings had fallen from the boy's shirt pocket and were scattered on the square floor. On impulse, she bent down to collect them. "He kept drawing constantly during the 3 days," she said, handing him the crumpled papers. "It seems important to him, but I couldn't understand what they mean." The businessman took the drawings and examined them carefully. His face paled visibly as he looked at his son's scribbles. There was something in the crooked lines that clearly made sense to him in a way she didn't understand. "Where were you hiding?" he asked with a sudden urgency in his voice. "Why? These drawings, they show faces, people he saw." She looked at the papers again, trying to see what he was seeing. They were just childish scribbles to her, but in his expression there was recognition and something that looked a lot like fear. "I need to talk to you alone," he said, looking around the square as if he feared being watched. "There are things you need to know." "We have nothing to talk about." "Yes, we do. More than you imagine." Before she could answer, the sound of approaching engines made them both look towards the street. 3 familiar motorcycles appeared on the corner, moving slowly as if they were looking for something. The same men who had chased the boy 3 days ago. "They found you," she murmured, feeling panic rise in her throat. The businessman took her arm firmly but without hurting her. His blue eyes were fixed on hers with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Trust me," he said in a low, urgent voice. "I'll explain everything, but we need to get out of here now." The bikers had spotted them and accelerated towards the square. She looked at the boy, who was clinging to his father in fear, then at the man who was watching her with an expression that mixed determination and something deeper that she couldn't identify. All her escape choices narrowed down to a single, impossible option. Accept the help of the most dangerous man she could find. Dangerous not because of the bikers chasing them, but because of what he was making her heart feel after 2 years completely dormant. The businessman's car cut through the city traffic with surgical precision as she clung to the leather seat, watching in the mirrors to see if the bikers were still following them. The boy was asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the tension, his small hands still holding some of the drawings that hadn't fallen in the square. "Where are we going?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the nervousness that was growing with each passing minute. "My house. It's the safest place now." "Your house?" The irony of the situation hit her like a punch in the stomach. "Do you realize that I'm a fugitive? That the police have been looking for me for 2 years? He glanced at her quickly before turning his attention back to the traffic. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't decipher. Not judgment or fear, but an intense curiosity that made her uncomfortable. "What crime?" "Theft. 300,000 from the pension fund of the company where I worked as an accountant." "Did you do it?" The direct question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked that so simply, without accusations or automatic distrust in their voice. "No." "Then let's prove your innocence." The simplicity of his answer left her speechless. For 2 years, she had grown accustomed to the idea that she would never be able to clear her name, that she would spend the rest of her life fleeing an accusation she didn't deserve. But the certainty in his voice awakened something she had buried deep down. Hope. The house he took her to was not what she expected. Although clearly expensive, It was not ostentatious or intimidating. It was an elegant but cozy residence, with well-kept gardens and a feeling of home that surprised her. He drove straight into the garage, activating the automatic gate with a remote control. "My housekeeper is traveling this week," he explained as he turned off the engine. "It will just be the three of us." Inside the house, she felt completely out of place. The furniture was clearly expensive. The works of art on the walls were probably worth more than she had earned in her entire life. But there was an atmosphere of simplicity that reassured her slightly. Photos of the boy were scattered everywhere, showing a dedicated father who actively participated in his son's life. "Coffee?" he offered, heading towards a modern but welcoming kitchen. "I need to know why those men were chasing us," she said, ignoring the offer, "and what my son saw that made them so nervous." He made 2 cups of coffee in silence, as if organizing his thoughts. When he finally turned to her, his expression was grave. 3 months ago, I discovered that my former business partner was embezzling funds from the company. When I confronted him about it, he denied everything and suggested I was being paranoid from work stress. He paused, running a hand through his hair. "A week later, my son was kidnapped for the first time. First time. They managed to take him for a few hours. I asked for ransom. I paid it without involving the police, and they returned him. I thought it was over." She felt a chill in her stomach, understanding where this was leading. But it wasn't over. The kidnapping was just a test, to see if I would pay, if I would call the authorities, how I would react. After that, my former partner started making increasingly larger demands. Fraudulent contracts, property transfers, access to company funds. And you agreed. I agreed to everything to protect my son. But 2 weeks ago, I discovered something that changed everything. He approached her, holding a folder he had taken from a locked cabinet. He opened it on the kitchen table, revealing documents, photos, and newspaper clippings that made her blood run cold. "Your former partner isn't just stealing from your company," she murmured, analyzing the papers. "He's been doing it for years, with several people. And you are among his victims." The photos showed the familiar face of the man who had testified against her in court 2 years ago. The same man who had presented convincing evidence that she had stolen the company's money where she worked. The same man who had destroyed her life with lies so well crafted that even she couldn't understand how she had been framed. "He always works the same way," explained the businessman, pointing to different documents. "He infiltrates a trusted person into the company, usually someone in the financial area. After months of gaining everyone's trust, he elaborates a scheme to steal a significant amount and frame the person he had planted. But why do that? Why not just steal the money? Because that way he has 2 advantages. He keeps the money and gets a perfect scapegoat. The framed person flees or goes to jail, and he is free to repeat the scheme somewhere else." She sat down heavily in a chair, feeling the weight of 2 years of suffering finally making sense. All the evidence that had appeared against her, all the witnesses who confirmed her guilt, all the perfect elaboration of a crime she never committed. How many people has he done this to? At least 12 in the last 5 years. All women, all in their 30s, all honest workers who trusted him. The anger that rose through her throat was so intense that for a moment she couldn't speak. 2 years of her life stolen, 2 years living as a criminal, 2 years without being able to sleep soundly or trust anyone. And now he's doing the same thing to you. With one difference. He can't frame me directly because I own the company. So he's using my son as leverage to force me to sign documents that give him legal access to the funds. That's why the kidnapping. That's why the kidnapping. And that's why he was so desperate when you saved my son. His plan depended on keeping the child under control. The boy appeared at the kitchen door at that moment, rubbing his sleepy eyes. He ran to his father and snuggled in his lap, but his eyes fixed on the documents scattered on the table. He pointed to one of the photos with his small finger. "Bad man," he said in a low, frightened voice. She and the businessman exchanged glances over the child's head. The drawings the boy had made during the 3 days hidden were not random scribbles. They were portraits. Portraits of the man who had destroyed her life and was now threatening the family that had saved her. "He saw when the kidnapping happened," murmured the businessman, stroking his son's hair. "He saw who gave the orders. And now we know who the real culprit is." The businessman's phone rang at that moment, interrupting the conversation. He answered with a cautious expression that quickly turned to alarm. "I understand," he said after listening for a few minutes. "Thank you for letting me know." He hung up and looked at her with an expression that mixed determination and fear. "It was my lawyer. My former partner just filed a police report claiming that you kidnapped my son and are blackmailing me. The police are away." The sound of distant sirens began to echo through the neighborhood, growing louder with each second. She looked at the boy who was watching her with complete trust, then at the man who had just become her only chance to prove the truth. "Trust me," he said, getting up and grabbing his car keys. "We have enough evidence to prove everything, but we need to get to it before he destroys the last documents." The sirens were getting closer as they ran out the back door, heading towards a truth that could either free her or destroy them forever. Rain began to fall as they arrived at the office building where his former partner's office was located. The businessman parked the car on a side street, away from prying eyes, while she nervously watched the activity at the main entrance. The boy was asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the day's emotions, oblivious to the danger that surrounded them. "The night security guard knows me," he murmured, checking his watch. "We have maybe 20 minutes before he realizes we're here and calls my former partner. What if we don't find anything?" "We will. He's too meticulous not to keep records of everything." They entered through the underground parking garage, using the access card he still possessed. The elevator took them directly to the 14th floor, where the former partnership's offices were located. The hallways were empty and silent, lit only by emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on the walls. The former partner's office was locked, but he knew the combination to the electronic safe hidden behind a fake painting. His hands trembled as he entered the numbers, and she could hear his heart beating fast in the quietness of the room. The safe opened, revealing stacks of meticulously organized documents, fake contracts, fraudulent bank transfers, and most importantly, complete dossiers on each of the victims over the past few years. Hers was at the top of the pile, containing photos, personal information, and a detailed timeline of how she had been framed. "Oh my God," she murmured, flipping through her own dossier. "He watched me for months before setting me up." "Look at this," said the businessman, showing her another document. "Here's the plan to use my son. Every step of the kidnapping, every demand he would make, even the exact amount he planned to steal." They quickly photographed all the documents with his cell phone, creating digital evidence that could be sent to the authorities. But it was when she opened a folder marked "Emergency" that they found something even more impactful. "He has copies of everything," she said, feeling a mixture of relief and horror. "All the transfers he made using my identity, all the forged documents, even recordings of the meetings where he planned to frame me. Why would he keep evidence of his own guilt? Life insurance. If someone tried to blackmail him, he would have a way to prove that other people were also involved." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them freeze. Someone was coming up the stairs, trying to be quiet but failing. They looked at each other, knowing they had only seconds before they were discovered. "The window," he whispered, indicating the fire escape. But it was too late. The door opened violently, revealing the former partner accompanied by 2 of the bikers who had chased them. The man was shorter than she expected, with graying hair and a cruel smile that didn't disguise the anger in his small, calculating eyes. "What a touching reunion," he said in a slow, dangerous voice. "The bankrupt businessman and the fugitive thief trying to rewrite history." "We have the evidence," said the businessman, shielding her with his own body. "Everything is here. Your victims, your methods, everything." Evidence? Laughed the former partner. You broke into my office and stole private documents. Who's going to believe you? The police will believe it when they see the recordings where you confess to framing her. The man's expression changed slightly, revealing a concern he quickly tried to disguise. What recordings? The ones you kept as life insurance, including the one where you explain in detail how you falsified the evidence against her and how you planned to do the same to me. It was then that the boy appeared at the door, having woken up alone in the car and come up looking for his father. Upon seeing the former partner, his eyes widened with fear, and he began to cry. "Daddy, it's the bad man. He's the one who told them to get me." The former partner looked at the child with contempt. "Little brat. If you had stayed quiet, none of this would have happened. Do you confess?" she asked, holding firmly onto the cell phone that continued to record. "Confess to what? That I caught a thief red-handed 2 years ago, that I'm protecting my business from an incompetent partner. Confess that you stole the money and framed me. Confess that you kidnapped the boy to blackmail his father?" "Proving that would be interesting," he said, signaling the bikers to approach. "Especially considering that you're going to have a terrible accident leaving this building." It was at that moment that she realized something strange. Throughout the entire conversation, the businessman had remained too calm, as if he wasn't surprised by the former partner's appearance, as if he had been expecting it. "You took your time showing up," said the businessman, looking at the former partner with an expression she couldn't decipher. "What do you mean?" she asked, feeling something icy rise in her stomach. "I called him before we left the house, told him where we'd be and when." The revelation hit her like a punch. The man she had trusted, for whom she had begun to feel something dangerous, had set a trap. She looked around the room, calculating the chances of escape, but the bikers blocked all exits. "Why?" was all she could ask. "Because he needed a confession," said a new voice at the door. 2 police officers entered the room, followed by a district attorney she recognized from the news. They had been followed for much longer than she had imagined. "Everything was recorded," said the DA, showing a small audio device. "Every word, every confession, every threat." The former partner tried to run, but the police were already prepared. In a matter of minutes, he and the bikers were in handcuffs, while she was still trying to process what had happened. 3 months ago," explained the businessman, holding her hands gently, "when I found out what he was doing, I contacted the police. But we didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. We needed a confession. And you used me as bait." "Not exactly. When you saved my son, I realized we had a unique opportunity. You were one of his victims. You had a reason to want justice, and he would be desperate enough to expose himself if he thought he was losing control. But you risked my life. You risked your son's life. We took risks, but with protection. The police have been following us since we left the house. Every move was monitored." She looked at the boy who was now clinging to his father's legs, relieved to see the bad men being taken away. The drawings he had made during the 3 days in the warehouse weren't just scribbles. They were the visual memory of a child trying to process the trauma of having seen the real culprit. "Your charges will be dropped tomorrow," said the DA, approaching her. "We have more than enough evidence to prove your innocence and convict him of all the crimes he committed." 6 months later, she was sitting in a modern office overlooking the city, analyzing financial reports for the construction company where she now worked as chief financial officer. The position had been offered by the businessman, but she had insisted on going through the entire normal selection process to prove that she deserved the job through competence, not gratitude. "Daddy said you're going to be my new mom," said the boy, appearing at her office door with a new drawing in his hands. "Your dad said that?" she asked, trying to hide her smile. "He said he's going to ask you to marry him on my birthday next week." She looked out the window and saw the businessman crossing the parking lot, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers, the same ones she had mentioned as her favorites during a casual conversation weeks ago. There was something nervous in his movements that made her smile. During the past few months, they had built something solid and true. Not just the intense romance that had sprung up between them, but a partnership based on trust, mutual respect, and the understanding that the greatest riches couldn't be measured in assets or investments, but in the courage to fight for what was right. When he entered her office, carrying the flowers and a small understated ring, she already knew what her answer would be. The boy had snuggled into her lap, drawing a family of 3 smiling people while the father knelt beside her desk. "Will you agree to be our family forever?" he asked, with the same vulnerability in his eyes that she had seen that first day in the square. She looked at the man who had risked everything to give her back her dignity, at the child who had taught her that some people are worth any sacrifice, and at the new life she had built with her own hands after losing everything. "Yes," she replied, knowing she was choosing not just a future, but the promise that she would never run from anything again, especially not from the true love she had found in the most unlikely of places. If you like this wonderful story, please comment giving a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.